Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to this episode of Non-Toxic Environments. I am your host, Andy Pace. Today is another exciting conversation, and this one it's a long time coming. Believe me, it is. This is something that I have been asking for the 30 years that I've been at this level of construction methods and healthy home living, looking for certifications and standards for how to build a healthy home. But we're going to kind of talk about, where this came from, uh, the concepts that were used to put this together, where it's going, where it's taking us, and how it's going to relate to all of us in the healthy home, chronic inflammatory space, chemical sensitivity space. And so with us today is Rachel Hodgdon. And did I pronounce that correctly, Rachel?
Close enough. Hodgdon.
Hodgdon. Thank you so much. Let me start it again. With us today is Rachel Hodgdon with the International Well Building Institute. And Rachel is the CEO and president of Well. And this is, again, really exciting. Rachel, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for this conversation, Andy.
Wonderful. So before we get going on the nuts and bolts of the actual concepts of Well, tell
Yeah,
us a little bit about what your background is, how you got into this, what brought you into the healthy building space.
sure. Well, I spent about 10 years at the U.S. Green Building Council, the organization that created LEED. You're well familiar with USGBC, being part of its chapter leadership over the years. And while I was at USGBC, my principal responsibility was to focus on K-12 schools and higher education. And I became really intrigued and eventually quite enamored with what we were learning about LEED schools in practice. And I'll tell you a couple of stories that really underscore this. I would go on these tours with like the architects, proudly showing me around these newly LEED certified schools. And I'd meet teachers that, told me they no longer suffer from the 2:30 headache, which is a term that they had coined for just how sick they felt after being in their old school building for, the full day of school. I would meet really often actually parents who or students themselves who would say my child needed their inhaler 3 times a day at their old school, and since moving into this LEED school haven't needed it once. And I knew on a very personal level about the negative impacts of sick school buildings because my mother was an employee of our local school district for several decades. And she, to this day, has permanent respiratory damage from being in sick classrooms. And in fact, the story that's always stuck with me is she walked into a school building one day. She was like a canary in the coal mine because she's particularly sensitive, her respiratory system, and all of a sudden she couldn't breathe. She went to the teacher and said, I don't know what's going on in this classroom, but it's not good. And the teacher was like, I am so glad you said something, and dragged my mother in to see the principal because for months, the teacher had been trying to get the administration's attention about what she intuitively knew was wrong in her classroom because she was having issues. The kids were having issues, missing school. And my mother's reaction, the severity of it, finally prompted them to go in and do air quality testing. They found that classroom was overrun with mold.
Mm.
And as a result, they bumped that school up on the renovation list, and that school is now a LEED certified school. So, we set out at USGBC to create buildings that were going to save the planet. And ultimately, we found that those buildings were saving us too. And so about 7 years ago, I had the opportunity to join Rick Fedrizzi, the founder of the U.S. Green Building Council, and a past CEO, as he took over IWBI, the International Well Building Institute. He asked me to join him. I started as chief product officer, and then became the president. And about 3 years ago, I became the CEO and president.
Wow. That's a wonderful uh, turn of events, I guess, to say that, starting off, I think all of us in the environmental space, we all kind of thought that we're going to do the right thing to try to help the earth. And I totally applaud that.
Yeah.
But the unintended consequence sometimes were we doing the right thing for the human occupants? And that's one thing that I've always kind of pushed back against, because I've found that a lot of the early lead projects, and I've been involved in dozens of lead projects over my career, and I can name probably a dozen of them that I know specifically how they kind of skirt the issue of points, and started adding in a bunch of materials that weren't really healthy for the occupants, but they met the requirements for the lead points. And
Mm-hmm.
so customers would come back to me and say, I just walked into a LEED Platinum building. I had to walk out in 5 minutes because of the toxic off gassing. And so uh, you have the background of working with Lead for Schools, which was a real big step forward. And I know, just working with Dr. Doris Rapp over the years, and she wrote the book, Is This Your Child's School? And about how school air is so dangerous to kids and to staff, of course. It was a perfect continuation of the LEED program, Lead for Schools, and now the Well Building Standard. So thank you very much for giving us that background. So, and I just want to say to everybody who is on the show today, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Be really happy to answer as many as we can moving forward. If it's works into the conversation, we'll certainly work into the conversation. So if you can, give us an overview on what the 10 key concepts of WELL is or are.
So you use the exact right word, concepts. That's a
Okay.
term that we use for the 10 different categories that make up the well building standard, and now the well residential standard as well. So let me see if I can get all 10. I feel like I always end up leaving one out.
I'll
Um,
write them down while you go.
and then I'm always afraid that someone from our standard development team will hear it and be offended, because there's one expert on the team for each of
Right.
these 10. So, okay, let's see. Air, water, nourishment, light, movement, thermal comfort, sound, materials, mind, and community. I think I did it.
Fabulous.
And these are all of the different ways in which our physical and social environments combine to impact our health, our well-being, our productivity, and our performance.
And so how does that incorporate that into, or how do you incorporate those into the standards that you're creating?
Yeah. So the art that we practice at IWBI, particularly by our standard development team, is taking the research, thousands of different studies that show us how the built environment and social environments can impact our health and well-being, and translating that research into practical, actionable, and flexible strategies. And each of those strategies get defined as features in the well building standard. Features, in effect, are your opportunity to earn points toward various levels of well achievement. Well certifications ranging from bronze to silver to gold to platinum, or well ratings, which focus on a particular themed group of features like equity or like health safety. We pride ourselves on creating a roadmap for our customers' well journeys that is concrete and specific, but also flexible enough to be used in more than 130 countries across 5 billion square feet of real estate, and by more than 74,000 commercial and residential locations, and growing by millions of square feet every day.
That is absolutely amazing. So compared to the LEED standard,
Yeah.
I mean, the LEED standard now is pretty ubiquitous, right? I think in most situations, buildings are built with either the LEED standard or some type of environmental standard. The well standard is still somewhat in the infancy stage, but it sounds like the trajectory is just going straight up.
Yeah, it's a big baby, right?
Yeah.
5 billion square foot baby, but
Yeah.
but definitely still modest in our impact as compared to LEED, following a very similar set of principles around market transformation. But with well, we've also made some pivots to the strategy, in particular to focus on existing buildings from the very outset, and
Okay.
to focus on organization or company-wide level adoption, so that the impacts of well can scale quickly and we can reach that vision of market transformation and spaces where people can live their best lives and thrive in their workplaces that much faster.
Okay. So I want to just kind of open up one of those topics really quickly here. Obviously, our listener base would be people with chemical sensitivities, allergies, asthma, those suffering from chronic inflammatory response, mast cell activation, essentially getting sick from the environment that they live
Yeah.
in. How does how does the well standard in practice help the person who's just trying to build a healthy home? They're not looking to, they don't want to this to be a pilot, they don't a program. They don't want this to be an example program. They just want to live in a healthy house,
Yeah.
and they want to make sure that what they are doing is leading to that end of the healthy home.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, we put our standards and the references to the research that undergird our standards out into the public domain. We
Okay.
view it as a kind of public service to make that research and the translation of research to practice transparent and accessible. And we've even gone a step further. If you're consulting with our digital standard, you can actually access per every single one of our features, what we refer to as a research digest, which is a layman's summary of what the evidence tells us, and practical strategies that map to that evidence. So we've tried to make the strategies within well accessible, even if you're not planning on achieving a certification or a rating.
Mm.
We haven't published our new residential standard yet. It's in pilot right now, but we will shortly. And I'm really, really hopeful that that standard in particular can serve as a very actionable and flexible set of guidelines for any homeowner, home builder, home designer, even real estate professional who's trying to guide clients to help them make the best choices for their families. I think the last couple of years have dramatically increased our collective awareness around how our homes, and for that matter, all of the places and spaces where we live our lives, impact our health, our well-being, and our fundamental safety. Up until recently, unless you were one of those canaries in a coal mine, like your listener base, like my mother, like the mother of a child who sent her daughter to a school district in West Virginia where their school was swallowed by a sinkhole, but they couldn't pass the bond initiative that would get the new school built. So the kids are learning in these portable classrooms, which they make sometimes teachers refer to as learning cottages, which is just like the worst kind of euphemism you could imagine. And the principal said, why did this bond initiative fail? And she said, because our parents don't really understand, this was years ago, that the connection between where their child is learning and their health and well-being and performance. And so unless you're that mother, she said, who had to pull her child out of school and move to a new school district because her daughter was having asthma attacks Monday through Friday and then recovering on the weekend, you just may not really understand that it's where you are spending your days that's making you ill. And so, I think the amazing thing about where we are today, and we have in part the pandemic, to thank for the acceleration of some of these technologies and these technologies being made mainstream, is that a lot of the things that will make the biggest impact in a home can be implemented for very low cost and can be implemented in existing homes just as much as homes that are benefiting from a ground up design and construction process. And I know that from experience because in New York we're renters. We don't own our apartment in New York, and we recently were subject to construction happening next door. And all of a sudden, my standalone air purifiers are going red. And I'm looking at the readings. I've got a baby at home, and they're totally off the charts
Mm.
for particulate matter. And it took me a couple of days to get those levels down to green, and then to get them even better down to zero. And as a homeowner, you can buy those things off of Amazon. You can buy a real-time air quality monitor at CVS. I swear I saw it on the
Mhm.
pharmacy shelf last week. And that is a huge development. The fact that these things have become affordable and accessible is a massive benefit to all of us. Now we just have to educate people on how to choose the right products and technologies, and how to leverage them into our living spaces.
Without a doubt. I know that, before the pandemic, we were spending about 90% of our lives indoors. And for kids, you're talking about these classrooms. I remember years ago doing a pilot project with a very, very good school in Ohio,
Mhm.
private school, and they took one wing and they dedicated it to like all healthy materials. We put natural linoleum in, air purification systems, toxin-free paint, the works. And they looked at just performance of kids in that classroom compared to the other classrooms, and they found that their productivity went up, their
That's right.
attention span was longer.
Yep.
They didn't come out of the classroom, like you said, with that 2:30 headache,
Yep.
because of the school air. It makes a huge difference. And so now enter the pandemic, the last 4 years, and especially the first year and a half, 2 years, where people were literally stuck in their home at the kitchen table. Mom and dad are doing the work at the end of the table, and kids are doing, work there. And parents are looking around going, well, as long as I'm home, I'm going to start doing some remodeling in here because that could use a little painting here, or I could put some blue flooring in there. As a material supplier, our business went up during the
Yep.
pandemic because people were doing all these at-home projects. But the interesting thing was that so many people came to us and said, well, I've got to live with this while the work's being done.
Right.
Well, they did before, they just didn't correlate that.
Yeah.
And now that they're at home actually watching it all, it's just I it's the silver lining to the cloud of COVID is
I
that
agree.
it brought us great awareness of our built environment and how we need to improve it.
Yeah, that's right. And I think depending on where you lived, you were working from home or being schooled from home, finding that your environment was healthier and more productive, or quite the opposite. You were finding that you could be more productive at your house than you were at the office, or less so. You were finding that you almost definitely suffered that season or those couple of seasons from fewer colds and flus. It wasn't just COVID. I mean, we lose billions of dollars in productivity losses every year just from, cold and flu season.
Right.
And prior to the pandemic, it was like the hallmark of a good employee, somebody who would show up hacking and wheezing to work because they were just that committed to the job. That we ever thought that that was a good idea for people or for business is in and of itself kind of wild. And right now, I think one of the sort of fights that we're fighting is to remind, to keep this on the brain, to say to people like, let's not forget everything that we learned during the pandemic. We can do better. And it's not just to protect us from the the next pandemic, airborne pandemic that's around the corner. That's coming. Gupta calls this the pandemic era.
Mm.
But from everyday illnesses that every winter are causing us to lose out on productivity and just to feel really, really bad. And that's just the beginning of it, right? I mean, I shudder to think about what the long-term implications for my son would have been with his developing respiratory system,
Right.
if I hadn't had the information at my fingertips and I hadn't been able to find, add-on solutions in my apartment. Because I mean the air was unbreathable. We came
Mm.
home from a week away and everything was covered with a layer of brown dust and dirt. One of
Wow.
the things I found out was that um, there was no filtration media over the main vent that was bringing fresh air in from the
Mm.
outside. I was enamored when I found this apartment during the pandemic because it had a separate HVAC unit than the rest of the building. So I was like, I'm not sharing air with anybody. This is so great. But the thing that made it so great during the pandemic actually made it so much more dangerous when that building started work next door, because I didn't have the filtration in place and didn't know it until I had that information coming through my real-time air monitors.
Wow. So the building being worked on next door, all that dust is kicked into the air outside, but then it's being sucked back into your space.
That's right.
And we talk about that quite a bit with residential construction, with if you're going to have an ERV or an HRV bringing in fresh air, how fresh is that air? You could be bringing in, like this time of year when you see that layer of yellow pollen over
Yeah.
everything, that
Right.
stuff's getting in your house too. So you got to be careful with how you set these systems up.
Well, and your real-time monitoring, because it's variable. It's not
Yeah,
static,
right.
So certain times a year it's going to be worse. Certain events, that are beyond your control, whether it's pollen in the springtime or higher levels of particulate in the wintertime. Your neighbor cooking, depending on, on your ventilation system, could be coming right into your bedroom. And so we're really big proponents at IWBI of leveraging real-time technologies for monitoring air quality. And that just puts so much more information at our fingertips. I'll give you another example. I've got a friend, I'm not going to out him on your show, but he's a vapor. And, addiction is a hard thing. And when he gets stressed, he vapes more. And I said to him when I was pregnant, I need you to promise me you're not going to vape while you're inside with me. And we were sitting in my living room, and all of a sudden, again, my air quality meter is like going crazy, this time not on particulates, which is what happened with construction, but on volatile organic compounds, VOCs. And I said to him, did you just take a hit of your vape? And he's like sheepishly like, no. And I'm like, this air quality monitor doesn't lie,
Right.
But imagine like how powerful it is to have that information. I think even the best intentioned homeowners often don't have good insights into the things they're doing in their homes that have the greatest impact. It could be opening a new package of markers. We've had people fail performance verification in well when someone comes in to do the air quality testing because they've just put new soil in the plants and the soil is off gassing. Every time I go on a tour of a well certified space, people tell me about the problems that they unearthed that they wouldn't have known about had it not been for that performance testing requirement in well. This is where the elevator pistons were pumping unfiltered air in from the outside because they were improperly installed. So we failed performance verification the first time around. Or, we didn't realize that our printer, which was right out on the main floor of the office, was off gassing. And so the levels of VOCs in that particular area were off the charts. So, we put it in a well-ventilated closet. These are the kinds of insights that we can have.
Yeah.
That's becoming more and more common in commercial buildings. I still think that's really rare in the residential space.
It is. I mean, the residential space is still pretty much the Wild West. And so, we're trying to tame that. We're trying to bring, some sense to this. But, to your point about air quality tests, I remember doing an air quality test just last year where the results came back. And so we have handheld meters, of course, but that just gives us kind of a snapshot in time, right? So we
Right.
do the air quality test and it comes back with just ultra high levels of VOCs. And again, if you get to know me a little bit more, I'm not a huge proponent of using VOC as the metric to
Yeah, the
determine whether or not the indoor air quality is healthy or not. Because let's face it, there are so many VOCs that are in our home that are
they're
completely
not all bad.
non-hazardous,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so, and case in point, uh, we find out that the VOC meter spikes, the results spike. I'm asking what's going on, what happened. Well, we'll find out that the homeowner during the test went in the kitchen and cut an orange to eat for breakfast,
Hmm.
spiked up the VOCs to about 850 grams per liter.
Wow. That one's
So,
the orange surprises me, I gotta say. But what I will say is that for commercial buildings, for performance testing, we do require speciated VOC measures. We're
excellent.
actually being able to isolate the VOCs that are the most problematic.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, right now, those types of air quality meters, as I'm sure you know, are far too expensive
Yes.
And they generally need to be calibrated more often than a homeowner is going to comply with. So yeah, you're still dealing with that average VOC reading. I mean, I'm a fan of air quality meters that measure for a lot of things because you want insights into all of them, you know,
Oh yeah,
CO2, NO2, VOCs, PM 2.5, PM 10, et cetera. So, you know, I'm a big fan of measuring for all of those things. And then
yes,
yeah, you're right. You have to be a little bit educated as a consumer. If the
right.
VOC level spikes and you can't do that speciated reading, it should spark your curiosity, but not your panic. If you see your
Exactly.
2.5, PM 2.5 levels go off the charts, don't panic, but like don't ignore that, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, that's the thing. It's like you have information is always valuable, no matter what. Good information, bad information, or bad news is just as valuable. You got to have that information to do something with, but then you have to make sure you are interpreting it correctly. And
Yeah.
so,
Well, actually, this is something important to keep in mind, like in schools, for instance. I think schools face a particular challenge on the facility side because they're often dramatically underfunded and they don't
mhm,
even have enough money to pay for like their leaky roofs and other deferred maintenance. And I used to have this conversation like 10 years ago with school facilities managers who I think are generally doing like amazing work with the very limited resources that they
mhm.
have. But I would say, like, you need to do water quality testing and air quality testing. And they would say, I don't want to know because I don't have a budget to fix it. And what I would tell them was like, in a few years, and certainly this prediction has come through, kids are going to be carrying these air sensors on keychains on their backpack. And you won't be able to hide from this information. And by the way, that information will be uploading to the cloud. I'm sure I didn't use the word cloud back then, but uploading to what is now the equivalent of the cloud, and the parent will be sitting there downloading that information on, you know, from their desktop. That era is here. The era of transparency is here, and I think it's incumbent upon all of us to have that knowledge and to take it into our own hands. I had a friend who was a principal at a school, and she had her water quality tested. They were doing it across the district, and the report came back, and she sent it to me and asked me if I could have someone take a look. I had a water quality expert take a look, and they came back and said, like, this water is totally unsafe to drink. She went back to the district and said, I understand this water is unsafe to drink, and they said, oh, don't worry, it's not nearly as bad as some of the other schools.
And you're supposed to feel good about that.
Right, and so, you know, I think all of us have to be not evangelists of this, but like practitioners
Right.
of this when it's our own health that's
Right.
on the line, and we have to be advocates for this. And so, you know, the poor people next door, not poor, but like the people doing construction next door, like didn't know what they were getting into with me as a resident because I'm sending them, you know, all my longitudinal measurements and all these like examples of the health consequences and things like that. They paid for my air purifiers as they should have. And then I was talking to other parents in the building. What are you noticing in your home? And one of the new moms was saying, like, I have been like hacking and wheezing. My throat has been burning. Um, you know, I think, and I consider her to be an incredibly well-informed mom on a variety of things related to her kids' health. She's a physical therapist. I go to her for a lot of advice. You know, which shoes should I buy for my son, you know, so his feet develop well. She had no idea, nor did she have any sense of what she could do to fix it. And I think that's exactly what I'm hoping well residential helps to advance is more awareness and more practical solutions that anyone can access to take control of um, the environments in their living spaces.
That's fantastic. I love that description of that. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about another project you are working on, and maybe you can expand upon, what your involvement is with the Healthy Building Network.
Oh yeah, I'm excited to talk to you about this. I got to get my talking points straight because full disclosure, I just did my board orientation yesterday.
All right.
But I am one of the newest board members of an organization that historically has been known as the Healthy Building Network, but now is going through a name change, calling themselves Habitable. And it is an incredible organization that harnesses, you know, the power of data and science to bring more transparency to what is in the materials that we use to build our buildings and the places where we're living our lives, spending 90% of our time or more, like you say. And then to help people make better choices in material selection, make safer choices, make healthier choices. And in particular, we've been working with them to leverage their new informed platform and tool into our new well residential standard. And what I love about the informed tool is that rather than focusing on the individual product, like this particular carpet tile by this particular company, they're actually focusing on what the health attributes are in the category of building material. And the reason why that is so important, I mean, it's important for a number of reasons, but I think the most important aspect of that is that by the time you get down to selecting, for instance, the carpet tile, you've already made a choice, carpet.
Carpet.
And so you weren't necessarily making a choice to ask yourself, generally speaking, what would be the healthiest, floor treatment that I could select. And so they've made a very user-friendly tool. I think it's a tool that's much more friendly to residential builders who have less budget, less time, less money, less staff oftentimes than commercial building developers. To help them, just choose, like, to understand, is this a red, an orange, a green, zone product? And where are the biggest opportunities to make the biggest strides, to make the biggest difference? And let's get them in that earliest phase of decision making. So I'm very excited about the work that organization is doing and how we might get to be a part of it. And I'm very excited about I think the much more readily accessible solution that their informed tool has offered as we're trying to shift practices in residential, where we've seen much lower uptake to date of healthy home practices than we have started to see in the commercial building sector.
Yeah, I think the combination of the Healthy Building Network and and even what I do as a healthy home consultant, I think works really well together.
Yeah.
I've been telling people for years, there are, I think Healthy Building Network says 85,000. At last count, we are about 92,000 different chemicals used in the production of building materials, home goods, and so forth. Out of that, we know the toxicological effects of about 3%.
Yeah.
Now, all those other chemicals that we don't know if they're actually healthy or not for us, we don't know how they interact with each other. We don't know how they interact with moisture and with heat when you start heating up a space. All these
Right.
unknowns.
Right.
And in our country, it's unfortunately, a chemical only gets taken off the market after there's been enough class action lawsuits and people getting sick or worse.
That's right.
And so I've had to help people through the process of building a home by choosing materials, not looking at an MSDS sheet, because an MSDS sheet or a SDS sheet is only going to give you, what a first responder or a spill cleanup crew needs to know. It's not going to tell you how it is to live with that product in its usable state.
Yeah.
And so I have to go back to 30 years of anecdotal information from clients before, 30,000 clients that said, these are the products that we did best with, and here's why. And then I do my own series of, formaldehyde off-gassing tests and VOC emittance tests and so forth, and how we create our list of materials.
Yep.
And then, of course, every customer is different. Every homeowner is different. It might be that one person is really triggered by mold because of chronic inflammatory response. The next customer says, that's not really the issue for me. It's the fact that, I want to protect my grandkids from the microplastics that are found in all the building materials.
Yep.
And so everybody has their own hot button.
Yep.
So work with an organization like Healthy Building Network, and then now with Well, to be able to come together with a set of standards that actually make sense. And then we can hopefully use that as part of our process for vetting materials and systems.
That's right. And you have to influence decisions all along the chain, right? So a lot of the work that Healthy Building Network does is or now Habitable does, is about shifting practices with those that are, designing and building the spaces, but even prior to that, manufacturers, as they're making choices about what to put in their products and trying to make better choices about that. Through our residential and commercial building standard, because the commercial one is used right now primarily in residential for multifamily, really seeks to influence the not just the design community, but home developers, because we really wanted to make sure that we were designing a system that could impact market rate homes and not just the whiz bang, like pop, most expensive homes that have bigger budgets and maybe more ability to bring experts into the project. And so you've got to sort of impact the standards that are in place for developers, as they're coming up with their specs, their product selection choices that they tend to repeat over and over again. And then for someone like you, Andy, and the Green Design Center, really working I think in many cases with homeowners themselves. And so you've got to be able to have that information at every point in the chain. And people ask a lot, like, is it going to be more expensive to build a healthy home? And I'm going through that process right now. I'm building a multi-generational, hopefully platinum certified net zero home with my family and my parents. And I would say that the biggest cost that I suspect most people will take on is the learning curve, because most architects and builders right now aren't educated on how to make healthier choices in the design and construction process. And so my hope is that for every one home that, becomes well certified, that, like as with LEED, for instance, there'll be 1,000 other spaces that are built utilizing those same standards. My architect, we did a charrette for well. And afterwards she said, she had printed out the draft standard of well residential. She said, like, this is going to be our new Bible. Like, we've always wanted to design healthier homes for our clients, but we haven't really had that set of guidelines. And there are so many practical strategies in here that we can absolutely do for low or no cost. But now we have the roadmap. And so that's, my hope is a lot more people will take advantage of that roadmap.
And so with you and your project, your own personal project, I want to get in this a little bit with the time we have left. As you said, the biggest part of this process is a learning curve of the architects, designers, contractors, because they have their way of doing things. And I'm not saying that their way is wrong. It's worked for them.
Yeah.
But they are, I say they collectively, the industry doesn't like being told what to do because they feel as if they've been able to do this successfully for decades.
Sure.
And when you say, well, maybe I want you to do moisture checks and all the wood before you start insulating and drywalling. Can you just do that for me? And they'll like, oh, I suppose we can do that. It's like you have to sort of guide them to these small little steps, and they'll get through a whole project and say, that really was not difficult. We should do this all the time. So tell us a little bit about this project and what did you do first? Like, who was the first contractor, or was the contractor, the architect? Who did you hire first in this process, and where did that take place?
Yeah. So, like so many crazy people during the pandemic, we were like, what should we do with our time? Let's build a house. During the most expensive and challenging time probably in our living memory to do that. But my parents really wanted a place where they could age in place, and where they live right now on Cape Cod, there's no way to retrofit their home for a first floor bedroom. And meanwhile, my wife and I were working on having our first child, and probably will be the only one, full disclosure. And we thought, we'd really like to be closer to family. And we hatched this idea of building a multi-generational healthy home. Both of my parents have particular sort of health challenges, around mobility and air, sensitivity to air quality issues and so forth. And so the health component was really important to us. And so from the outside, the home that we've designed is one home, but on the inside, it's really two separate floor plans, so that, you know, we can live relatively independently within that space. But the first floor bedroom that my parents would occupy can be flipped to either floor plan. So over the generations, you know, they may need more space, or in the beginning, less space later. We have that flexibility. We can sort of flip flop on different sides of the house. The first thing that we did was interview architects, and we had a lot of questions. You know, have you ever designed LEED homes before? What are the choices that you make related to health and well-being? And one of the reasons why we selected the amazing firm J&A, Jill Neubauer Architects, was because they did have a lot of experience in building green homes, which I think is a close cousin of healthy homes. And one of their first recommendations was that they bring on an environmental and sustainability consultant. So they were really readily willing to admit that they didn't necessarily have all of the knowledge, but we could get faster to the best choices in the project if we hired someone who could advise on things like active ventilation, for instance, or insulation, a couple places where you have opportunities to make a big difference. So we've focused a lot on ventilation. Of course, we've focused a lot on healthy materials, and aimed for, you know, zero VOC materials wherever possible. All of the windows, with the exception of like a tiny number of them, are operable. And that, you know, works really well some of the year in Massachusetts. But they're also incredibly high quality, you know, triple pane windows that are allowing us to meet our net zero goals. It's sometimes you end up compromising one for the other. And then, you know, we've thought about a lot of other aspects of health and well-being in the home as well, like physical accessibility. Should one of my parents be wheelchair bound? We've thought about healthy cooking, because that's one of the greatest sources of pollution in the home. So, you know, ventilation and full electrification across the entire home, no combustion, you know, no gas stoves, no fireplace, which was a big conversation with my parents, because who doesn't love a fire in the dead of winter? And then probably one of my biggest victories as we've undertaken this home project, and the thing I would recommend if you wanted to do one thing to make a big difference in your house, I got my parents to commit to a shoe-free household, because
Perfect.
so much of what gets tracked in is on your shoes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm here in New York today. Lead is for sure on the bottom of my shoe if you were to test for it. We've got a 1-year-old. He's crawling. His breathing, you know, space is right down at that floor level. And I was able to compel my parents. We never had a shoe-free household growing up. I was like, look, you can buy regular shoes, but you just can't take them out of the house. And they created a whole shoe cubby system. And my mother bought like 20 pairs of slippers in different sizes, because God forbid someone should have cold feet. Those little things are going to make a very big difference.
That does make a huge difference. And I've used that tip before. And it's like the quick and easy way to make your home healthier right away is to just not wear shoes in the house.
Yeah.
Makes a big difference. And so, um, boy, I could go on tangents with this. I will say this, that what I do love about this is you're approaching a healthy home from the holistic viewpoint. It's not just, can we meet these checklists and get the points, but we have to take in consideration too, if we're going to build, where are we building? You know, do we have access to a park? Do we have access to, you know, food? Is there a grocery down the road? I mean, all these things. I have to tell clients all the time that something that seems so just a pedestrian way of doing things might actually be that healthy home attribute, because it makes you feel good.
That's right.
You know, that's and I've mentioned this 100 times in podcasts, that there's a quote in Stapatya Veda architecture, which is an Eastern Indian philosophy of building and placement and so forth, that says that every corner of every room should bring you bliss.
Mhm.
Meaning, don't build a big mansion that you can't afford to decorate the way you want and to finish it out the way you want. Build something smaller, and make sure that you love every space. And that when you wake up in the morning and you walk into that kitchen, you just love the flooring, you love the cabinetry, whatever it is. That's a healthy home attribute that a lot of us forget about.
Yeah, well, and a lot of what makes a home healthy is not readily visible to the naked eye. So I think we think a lot about aesthetics when we design our dream home, you know, if we're so lucky, or when we select the apartment or the home that we're gonna buy or that we're gonna rent. And I think this is goes to the heart of what we've been talking about in terms of the importance of awareness and education, because we have to ask different questions. So, you know, when we were renting our apartment in New York prior to the pandemic, not the one I live in right now, but the one before it, I was asking all these questions like, you know, is the stove vented to the outside? What about the dryer? Let's talk about, you know, the operable windows, like all kinds of like, you know, very tacky questions. And my wife was just rolling her eyes at me like, this is so obnoxious. Nobody asked these questions in New York. You know, people want to know about the granite countertop. That's enough. And and then the pandemic happened. And I remember the day she turned to me and was like, you were right. And now I think more people are asking those questions, but let's really work to educate people so that they do know these questions, whether it's, you know, they're selecting a school to send their children to, they're selecting a home where their elderly parents are going to live. They're making a choice about where to buy or where to rent. You know, the place where they're going to lay their heads down to rest, their families are going to lay their heads down to rest for years to come. You know, let's arm people with the right questions to ask, and let's help people to make the homes that they have as healthy as they can be. And one of the things I'm most proud of is of the 30,000 plus residences that are enrolled in the pilot. This is a pilot, and we have over 30,000 homes enrolled. And they continue to sign up day over day. But of that 30,000 that are currently enrolled, the majority of them are existing homes under common operation. And in fact, 22,000 of them are privatized housing on military bases.
Wow.
And I'm
That,
just so excited. I feel like that, you know, the people who are putting their lives on the line to serve our country are as or more deserving than anyone else of healthy home environments. They haven't necessarily always enjoyed that as a right, let alone as a luxury. And I'm really, really excited about what we can do to help to help the military improve the spaces that they already have, in addition to the ones that they're looking to build in the future.
that is absolutely fantastic. I really, really love that approach. As we close up the show today, when can we look for the new well residential, those standards coming out to be able to go through?
Yeah. So I don't have an exact timeline for you. We have kept the draft standard under embargo while we've gotten this pilot up and running, but in the coming months, we'll be releasing that to the public. We're also working on new education and courses and professional certificates that would allow for that very practical education for the homeowner, the home buyer, the home seller, the home developer, et cetera. So kind of a full suite of tools and resources. In the meantime, like I said, our commercial building standard, which is chock full of strategies, guidance on selecting technology and so forth, is available at wellcertified.com. And yeah, look for the well residential standard coming to you. And if you really want to dive deep, find the research digests that are embedded within each feature in our digital standard, and you'll find a layperson summary of all of the research that can help you to make the case. I saw something come in the chat about, you know, trying to advocate for getting the scented candles and plugins that often are not good for our respiratory health out of their apartment building. This will make you sound like a real expert, and everything is absolutely free.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's right up my alley. I love that. I could read tech manuals and reports and reviews every day for the rest of my life. I'd be very happy. Rachel, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. I'm really excited about this. I look forward to seeing what happens next. And I'm really interested in how your home project goes. So I'll definitely want to keep in touch with you about that because I'd love to see if there's any way I can help.
You're
And
invited for a tour. It'll be open for business starting this summer. Hope with any hope. So far, it's on
fabulous.
track. And if anyone who's listening in is interested in enrolling as a pilot participant in our well residential program, they can get in touch with me directly or contact us through the website, and we'll be happy to give you more information.
And I'll definitely put all the links in the show notes. And so that'll be on the podcast and on the YouTube show. Thanks again for coming today, and hope to hear from you soon again.
Awesome. Thanks
All
again.
right.
Thanks
Take
for all.
care. Thank you, everybody. Have a good week.